It was early July. I had just begun my senior year of college, but was home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to come stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged because dat booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating. I returned a couple weeks later. It's now late July or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing, off campus. We had a main house, the big house, and a smaller house in the backyard, the little house. I needed to clean up the little house as I was going to move into it, since it was left pretty filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time in there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed into a teeny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to another to navigate the room, which we made a game of it, and made great use of them during the weekend. Sorry, bros. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house, and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right, on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6x8 glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozed off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake. I'm caught off guard because it's summer in an empty college town and we weren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment, then the doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepared to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door as if someone was trying to kick it open. Their attempt failed. I'm partially relieved, but I'm still aware that there are 2 doors that they could enter. Lisa is awake now, delirious and frantic. What's going on? What was that? I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house, and to go into the bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused, but I demanded. She scurried across the couches and locked herself in the back room. I ran to the far side of the kitchen to make sure the side door was locked. It is. Okay, we're alright for now. Thinking to myself, weapon, what can I use? Shit, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a few arrows. No, that's too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club, 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from the pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen and have a view of the front door and the side door while clutching the golf club, when suddenly the side door knob starts shaking and there's a couple of bangs at the door. Lisa screams from the back of the house and I yell at the intruder. We're in here. We called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone. The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are in the living room, full of couches. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30, and still no signs of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and angry that the cops had not come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, we called about 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruders make it inside? Yes, we're inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared that they're going to come back. The operator asked me for my address. I'm literally spelling out my address. The front door gets slammed, kicked again. I holler at the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on their way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from the windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding a golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6x8, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the black curtains, and I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I could imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later, we hear sirens, and I could faintly see the blue lights swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick down both doors, and there are boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered by a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunk dude from the trailer park nearby who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day.
This happened about 2 or 3 years ago. My uncle had cancer and wasn't doing too well. He had gotten his leg amputated 2 years prior to the events of this story, and had been improving since then. But all of a sudden, he took a turn for the worst. We were visiting him, and honestly, he gives the same sort of vibe as Jeff Goldblum. Bourgeois, fancy, but in like an elegant way that wasn't obnoxious. He was an older man in his mid-50s or so, and both of his sons no longer lived at home. He lived with my aunt. That night, my parents and I had ice cream while he drank wine, and we talked about various things that I don't remember. He asked me to sit on his lap, as I was his favorite niece. I felt bad for him, and I obliged, and I could feel how weak and bony he was getting. Later that night, I was reading a book when my father came downstairs and told me they were taking my Uncle Tim to the hospital. He had gotten really bad, really fast, and so he was headed to the ER. I was left in the house alone as they went out. I actually liked being alone and didn't mind at first. But as the night dragged on, I began to get this mysterious feeling of anxiety. I decided to go upstairs from the basement and lay against the heated floors in the living room, as they soothed me. From the living room, there was a sliding glass door with a view of the backyard. In fact, anyone in the backyard could see right into the living room. I was playing this rhythm game on my 3DS, and so I had my earbuds in, when suddenly I felt the anxiety return. This time it was much worse, to the point where I called my dad to ask when he was coming home. He didn't pick up, so I texted. When I looked up, I saw something odd in the backyard, despite it being very late in the night. It seemed like a man, but I couldn't be sure with such limited lighting. Either way, I froze and nearly pissed myself before running upstairs. Being 14 or 15, I was well aware of what dangers befell girls late at night, alone. I ran upstairs and considered calling the police, but I didn't want to attract any extra attention when my uncle deserved a quiet end. I knew he wasn't going to get through this. Instead, I decided to peek through the shades from one of the bedroom windows. A man walked into the dim light by the porch, looking right into the glass door. I was about 5 seconds from passing out due to fright. He was a tall sort of fellow with dark clothes. I'm pretty sure it was summer, since I remember noting how odd it was that he was wearing a thick scarf. However, I couldn't see his face or any detail about him. I began to call my father again, but the call wasn't going through. He was at the hospital, and in certain places I assume they don't have cellular. I figured maybe it was a gardener. My uncle was wealthy after all, and it wouldn't have surprised me that he had hired someone. I know it's stupid to think that looking back now, but I really didn't want to be a nuisance when my uncle was dying. The moment the man circled around to the front of the house, I ran down the stairs and headed to the basement. The stairs downstairs to the first floor were on the other side of the house, but the stairs to the basement were in the kitchen, in plain view of the patio glass door. I was so scared that I locked myself in the cramped space under the stairs. It was sort of a small place with a hole in the wall where a film projector was. It could play movies on the screen downstairs, and you went into the cupboard underneath the stairs to use the projector. I had enough room, even with the old toys thrown in there once my cousins had gotten too old. I suddenly froze when I heard the patio door slide open. It was quiet, but the entire house was silent. It could have been my family, but why would they use the back door? I just knew it was the man from out back, and I immediately started breathing quickly. I could hear footsteps upstairs and things move. At one point, he was right above me, his feet echoing on the stairs. It was dark in the basement, though, and thankfully the door was rather nondescript. After a few minutes, he went back upstairs. I think he was in the house for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, though it felt like hours when I was in there. Once I heard the door slide shut, I waited another 5 minutes or so until my ADHD couldn't take it any longer and I went upstairs. The man was gone and the house was mostly intact. There were a few things missing or out of place, however. A few hours later, at around 3 a.m., my father came back and asked why the house was like this. I said it was my fault, and he chewed me out for being a nuisance when my uncle was in critical condition. I never told anyone until now what really happened, since I didn't feel comfortable sharing before now. And at the time, I remained silent as I didn't want to put any more on my aunt's plate. Even thinking about it now, it's pants-shitting terrifying. Oddly enough, the house burned down a month or two after my uncle passed. I think it was a lit stove or something, but I don't remember the details. My aunt survived as she wasn't home, but she's been moving house to house since then. I really feel bad for her having to come out of retirement. Sometimes I wonder if that man came back and left the stove on, but I don't like to entertain that thought.
So first of all, let me tell you how the story began in March of 2017. I am a 19-year-old male. My family and I moved to a new house in March 2017. I was really excited because this house was huge and had a beautiful garden with a pool and a hot tub. I'm not bragging about this information. It will be important later. When we moved in, the real estate agent told my parents that there had been a series of home invasions in our street and that our house and our neighbor's house were the only ones which hadn't been broken in yet. The first weird thing started to happen in May 2017. My room is at the patio, so when I look out my window, I can see the patio and the hot tub. At first, I could hear the gate of our garden being opened at night. This continued for the next 10 weeks. Sometimes we would go outside in the morning and all our lamps were bashed in. It's like our property is haunted by a poltergeist since we haven't seen anybody do these things. At first we thought some burglars are opening our garden gate at night because every morning my parents open the patio door so our dog can go outside and pee while my parents would get dressed to go for a morning walk. So I guess the burglars were hoping that our dog would run off so they would have it easy to enter our home. All of these incidents made my mom feel really unsafe in our own house. All of a sudden it stopped, so we thought the person who did this moved on or got bored. But after 5 months, everything started over again, but worse. It's November, and I wake up to hear footsteps outside my window. So I open my eyes and wish I wouldn't have done that. The moment I was so scared of actually happened. What I saw was a 6'3" man standing outside my window, watching me while I was asleep. He looked so old yet so young. He had this young face, but his haircut made him look 25 years older. At least that's what I could see in the dark. I was frozen. I couldn't move. So we just looked each other in the eyes for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly he ran off, so I took my chance and ran to my parents' room and told them everything. My dad grabbed his gun, which he is keeping at home now because he got worried over the last few months. He is a police officer. He ran outside but couldn't find the man, but found a broken gate, so he called the police. The police came, but they couldn't do much, and they left rather quickly. 2 months later, I woke up to splashing sounds. I got up and looked outside my window. I noticed the sounds were coming from the pool, but I couldn't see it due to the trees blocking my view. So I shrugged it off, because I thought there was just something wrong with the pump, which wasn't a rare thing. So I went back to bed, but I had a hard time falling back to sleep. The sounds grew louder and more intense, so I got up and went into the living room, which allows me to see the entire garden. When I look outside, I got the same feeling which I had 2 months ago when I spotted the guy outside my window. Anyway, I looked outside and saw the same man standing in our pool, draining the pool with a small cup, and I mean it how I said it. He was standing in our pool with a cup, throwing water onto the grass. He had a dead stare in his eyes like he didn't even know what he was doing. He noticed me watching and just smiled at me. I woke my dad up immediately and we called the police. They left as fast as they came, since they didn't find anything but our empty pool. They said it was probably a homeless guy and he was washing himself. But I'm certain that he was not just washing himself. It's now August 2018. I've noticed weird cars in front of our house lately, and if someone would spot them, they would drive off. My parents left me alone this weekend since it was my uncle's birthday. I didn't want to come along, so I decided to stay home. I got bored all alone in this big home, so I called a couple friends of mine to come hang out at my place. They came around 7 p.m. and we started drinking some wine and listening to music. Time passes and it was now 11 p.m. when we heard someone knocking on our window of our living room. I thought I was imagining the knocks, but my friend looked at me like they were about to ask if I was expecting someone else. I turned off the music and listened, but all we heard was silence. I turned on the patio lights when a girlfriend of mine yelled, "Hey, there's someone running." I didn't see anyone, but I heard the gate slam shut. I was worried, but decided not to call the cops since they couldn't do anything anyway. I was really glad that my friend drank something and had to crash at my place, so I wouldn't be at home alone that night. Today is Saturday, and my friends left around 5 p.m. I was in my room when I heard something fall in my bathroom, so I got up to see what it was. When I walked towards my bathroom, I could see a person right behind the door. This person didn't know I spotted him, so I walked back into my room, got my phone, and called the police and my parents. When I passed the bathroom door, I saw the person was still in there. So I opened my camera and took a picture as proof for my family and friends. When I took the photo, my dumbass didn't think about the flash. So when I took the pic, the light illuminated the entire bathroom, and the door slammed shut. I thought this was my chance to abandon the house completely, so I ran out of the house and called the police. They arrived about 10 minutes later. They went inside and came out with the same man who was terrorizing my family for over a year now, half naked. The police said he was in the bathroom, just staring at the drain. He was constantly saying, "The cult elderly will eliminate you." Right now I'm sitting in my room, writing this story, and worrying about the cult he was talking about. Were the suspicious cars in the front of my house part of the cult, or was he just an insane man? The entire event doesn't seem to make much sense, and I don't know what is yet to come, but my family and I will be moving again in December. Thank God.
This is my first post on here. Definitely not my only experience of the sort. A bit of backstory first. My husband, fiance at the time, and I were struggling in the city we lived in, so my grandmother offered to help us and move us to the city she lived in. She described it as a small, cute city, and when you look on the website for the city, it truly did look like a small town with good history. We happily accepted the help and got ourselves moved to Kentucky. When we got there, we quickly realized that the city was pretty awful. Anyone from this part of Kentucky will know exactly where I'm talking about, as it's a pretty well-known place. It was a city filled to the brim with meth and violence, and walking around at night wasn't exactly the smartest idea. When we arrived, we got set up with the local Salvation Army, which then eventually was able to set us up at an apartment after we saved up some money. This is where my story takes place. When we were first looking for apartments, we were doing our best to find a decent area to live in. The place we found was settled back from any major parts of the city, and when we were shown the model apartment, it looked amazing. The people coming in and out looked like decent people just doing their thing. They also had a great deal on rent, so we chose this as our starting point for getting on our feet. When we got the key and apartment number, we were beyond ecstatic, only to find out we were given the worst building in the entire complex. Our door had at least a 1.5-inch gap from the bottom of the door to the floor. And while the layout was the exact same, the inside was gross. The entire building, as well as the apartment, looked like nobody had lived in it for years. And the apartment complex hadn't bothered to tidy up or fix the inside. Our peephole had been painted over, and their fix to that was to just take a key and scratch the paint away. Whatever, we were just happy to be able to finally have a place of our own. And we knew once the year was up, we could leave and never look back. Some of the only good paying work in the area was factory work. And of course, the best pay came from working third shift. My fiancé knew we had to keep doing what we had to do, so he worked third shift while I worked daytime at the local Walmart, which meant that I essentially lived alone overnight. We hadn't had any issues with the few neighbors that trickled in after we moved in, and I lived on the second floor, so I wasn't too concerned, and just always made sure to double check the locks before bed. One night, around 3 a.m., I was messing around on my laptop like I usually did when I had the next day off. All of a sudden, I hear someone banging on my front door. By banging, I mean it sounded like the police were at my door, and the fact I could hear it in my room with the door closed should show how loud it was. I immediately turned the video I was watching off and slowly opened my bedroom door. The only person I knew in this town was my grandma, and she wouldn't bang on my door like that, especially at this time of night. I crept towards the door, super freaked out, and tried to peek out the peephole without putting my feet in line with the huge gap. All I could see was a dark figure standing at my door since the peephole was scratched up and the lights in the hallway didn't work. I started creeping away towards my room to get my phone. I panicked and didn't grab it right away, when all of a sudden the person banged on the door again. At this point, I was terrified, but hoping that they would go away. There is no way in hell I was opening that door or asking who was there. So I just grabbed my phone and made my way out to the dining room, which had a view of the door without being in line with the gap. By the time I had made it back to the front of the apartment, I could hear the person messing with my locks and jiggling the handle. I initially froze before dialing 911, and I yelled out that I was calling the police. I hoped that would scare them away, and fortunately for me, it did. I was in tears with the operator until the police finally arrived and looked around the building. After searching, they came to my door to talk to me, and basically just told me it sounded like someone was drunk and trying to find the right door. My downstairs across neighbor had come out and told them she heard what was going on, and it didn't sound like someone who was drunk. The footsteps were clear and steady leading up to my door, and apparently after I yelled I was calling the cops, the guy took off down the other side and bolted through the back door, which led to some trees and whatnot. Not to mention, our stairs are pretty steep, so being drunk and sprinting down those stairs would have been quite a feat. She had initially assumed it was my fiancé coming home until she heard the banging on the door. Nothing happened after that incident, and we ended up breaking our lease and getting out of that town shortly after, for other reasons we couldn't just brush off. So to that creep who tried to break into my apartment at 3 a.m. while I was home alone, let's not meet.
This happened May of last year. I was staying with my ex-mother-in-law for the past year while my son and I got back on our feet after leaving my abusive ex. She lives in a fairly decent neighborhood. Not one of those rich ones with HOA, but not one of the crackhead ones either. Just a simple mid-class neighborhood. Back in March and April, there had been reports on our neighborhood site about some cars being broken into, presumably by kids. Not a huge deal, and after not keeping anything important in my car anyways, we all kind of brushed it off. One night I was feeling pretty sick, and she offered to watch my son if I wanted to go downstairs for the night. Grateful for the offer, I accepted and made my way downstairs. At this point I feel like I should explain more about the layout. Upstairs is a finished 3 bedrooms, 2 bath style house. The downstairs is a garage that was finished and turned into 3 extra bedrooms. 2 of the bedrooms are off to the left side, and the other one is on the other side. You have to pass the laundry room and a storage room to get to the other one. which is the one I slept in. This room is completely closed off from the rest of the house. In the storage room, there is a door that leads outside. This door is kept deadbolted and chained at all times. Keep this in mind. So I climb in bed. It's probably 9ish, and I fall asleep fairly quickly. The rest of this is kind of a blur. At some point of the night, I start hearing noises, which I brush off as someone walking around upstairs, and go back asleep. The noises wake me up a few more times before I realize that they're in the room. At this point, I think a cat must have gotten into the room. So I didn't get up, but I glanced around the room, and I could see almost the entire room from where I was laying. Over by the window, I see a white thing moving. I realize that the cat just followed me down without me noticing. Aggravated, I go to get up, and I realize what I'm seeing. It's not our white cat. It's not even a cat at all. It's the curtain and something coming through the window. At this point, I froze. I didn't know what to do. I just laid there and watched someone climb through the window and stand up. He was wearing a hat and stood at average male height. I could tell he was looking my way, but I couldn't make any features out. He walked over to my bed and leaned over till we were face to face. I didn't know if he could see my eyes open. I wanted to scream and say something, but I knew nobody could hear me upstairs. My heart was pounding, and it took everything I had to stay still and not scream. I didn't know what to do. The man was less than a foot away from my face as he leaned over my bed. I thought about making a move or saying something, but I couldn't make my mouth or body move. I was just paralyzed. He then turned and walked away out of the room. I heard the deadbolt to the door outside click, and the door opened, and he left. I heard him then come and close the window. I realized the noises I heard earlier was him prying the window open. I called my ex-mother-in-law as I was hysterical and so scared to move. She didn't believe me. She told me everything was locked up and it was just a nightmare. I got up and checked the window to find it had been pried open. She finally came downstairs, and the door that leads to the outside was unlocked. All 3 locks were undone. This is the point that she realized that I wasn't making this up. We never figured out who it was or what they wanted, and we haven't had any issues since then. So middle of the night intruder, let's not meet again.
This happened at the end of summer of 2016. To give you a bit of a backstory, my boyfriend and I were both around 20. So my boyfriend Max and I used to share an apartment with a married couple. Mind you, they were awesome. Unfortunately, Florida wasn't what they wanted, so they decided to move to Pennsylvania. Max and I started looking for people to replace them because rent where we lived was pricey, and we didn't want to have to pay the whole thing on our own. It was in a very nice area, but not close enough to the city, so most people that told us they would drop by to check out the place would flake out last minute. Eventually, we found this person that seemed to be a very nice and laid-back girl. She then explained how she was only looking for a place for her boyfriend, Dan. Now, I tend to see people's auras when I meet them, and I always get a certain feeling when I don't like them immediately. I'm not a judgmental person in the slightest. It's just something I feel and can't help. I did not like this person straight off the bat, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt because everyone else seemed to be okay with him. So I thought maybe I might be wrong, and I was hoping I was. As the time went by, Dan started being super loud, playing music loud enough for it to sound like it was being played from our room, etc. Other annoying shit too, and being beyond disrespectful, especially to me. Max wouldn't do anything about it, and I'm kinda glad because I know Dan would have wanted to fight him or something. Dan was 22 at the time, but had the mentality of a 12-year-old. Side note, we later found out that Dan had previous mugshots for shoplifting and other stuff. He also threatened to get me beat up several times. I just wanted to give you a bit of insight on Dan, so you understand what is coming. Buckle up. It was a Wednesday night. I got home at 5:30, and as I was walking upstairs and almost to the 3rd floor, which is where we lived, I saw him coming out of the apartment, but I don't say anything because I don't like him, so I mostly ignored him. But he started yelling at me and telling me to look at the apartment. I look inside from the doorway, and I saw nothing wrong, so I asked what he was talking about. And in a still angry voice, he claimed that he had been robbed, and that he had also just gotten home to this. But I saw all of the furniture is there and whatnot, so I'm thinking he was on one of his drugs. He usually was. I came in, and I did notice that my Wii U was gone, but the rest of my consoles were there. GameCube, PS3, Xbox, etc. So at this point, I was already suspicious of him. I tried to keep calm as much as I could, and I called Max to see how far from home he is. We usually both got home around the same time. As I'm calling, Dan yelled at me again that he had called the cops, and they said they were on their way, and in these exact words, he said, "Do whatever you need to do, because the police are on their way." When he told me that, I immediately knew that he had been home for a while, because he must have had time to hide all of his weapons and drugs, and God knows what else he had. Within 5 minutes, the cops were pulling in, and so was Max. The officer went upstairs with Dan and Max to write down everything that was missing, and the other stayed downstairs. I stayed with him just chatting. According to Max, we were missing a lot in our room, but Dan is only missing his PS4. I did ask him at last if it was possible to search Dan's car, and I also said if he needed to search mine or Max's car, we'd be okay with it. He said it wasn't necessary, but agreed to search Dan's car. The officers didn't seem to like Dan very much right off the bat either. Once they all came back downstairs, the officers asked Dan if they could search his car, and that they also needed his ID. He said he was okay with them searching his car, but he would need to get his ID and keys from the apartment. Max and I followed him upstairs. We saw him get his wallet and keys, and he left the apartment. We don't want to be nosy and stay downstairs while they search his car, so we stayed in the apartment. A few minutes go by, and he's still not downstairs with the cops. So we started looking around the neighborhood, but he had already vanished. How convenient. But, since he had agreed that they could search his car, and in no moment said they couldn't, they went ahead and started looking if the car was unlocked, and it fucking was. We found all of our stuff in his car. One of our 2 3DSs that was missing, our PS4 controller. We had no PS4, but we still used it to play PC games. Max's laptop, some Wii U games, etc. The next morning, I put all of his stuff out by the dumpster and had a locksmith change our locks. I thought of putting a restraining order on him, but ended up never going through with it. A few weeks later, we saw his car parked outside a few yards from our building, but we pretended like we didn't see him, and we just watched him from our room with 911 ready to be dialed. Eventually, he just left. So annoying, creepy roommate. Let's not meet again.
This occurred the last day of spring break. It was around 3 a.m, and I was sitting in my living room. I was eating and watching one of my favorite shows, Supernatural, when I heard something at the back door. Someone or something was tapping on our sliding glass door. Not quite a knock, but a very harsh tap. At first I was furious, because I thought my brother had somehow locked himself out, and I wasn't about to get up and help him. A few moments later, my dog started growling and barking, which scared me. because he would never bark or growl at any family members. When he ran to the back door, I was thrown into a panic attack. I had no idea what to do because my parents were asleep and was completely unaware of what was happening in their home. My mind flooded with the worst case scenarios and all the different ways someone could kill me or kidnap me. I realized that if I didn't do anything, somebody might just waltz right into the house. So I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and slowly made my way to the back doors. I walked over to the sliding glass doors where I heard the tapping come from and tried to look outside to see if anyone was there, but it was too dark. I couldn't see anything. I then used the flashlight on my phone in an attempt to see out the window, but it didn't work. So then I turned to look out the actual back door, and it was open. I was petrified. I had never been that scared in my entire life. Even more worst case scenarios started cramming themselves into my mind, like, he's already inside, or he's right behind me. I immediately spun around and swung the poker, making myself look like an idiot when there wasn't anybody behind me. I then realized that someone had opened the door and that they might be out there waiting for me to investigate. After I thought that, I knew I wasn't going anywhere near that door. Instead, I threw the poker at the door in order to get close enough that I felt comfortable closing and locking it. I ran over to the door and locked it as quickly as I could before picking up the poker off the ground. I tried once again to look out the window. I could very faintly make out something or someone moving a tarp while rushing away. I immediately ran to my parents' room to tell them that someone had just tried to break into our house, and they completely ignored me. I told them that someone had opened the back door and I saw someone running away. My mother responded with, "Did you lock the back door?" She wasn't even the slightest bit worried, which scared me even more. For the next 2 weeks, I refused to go anywhere near the back doors after it got dark. This was the most horrifying experience of my life, and I don't think anything will ever compare to those 4 minutes. So whoever was outside my house, let's not meet.
I attended a liberal arts college in a historic southern city which happens to be a popular tourist attraction. My sophomore year, summer of 2007, my friends and I lived in what was dubbed the gravel pit, which was exactly that. A row of houses that sat facing each other on a gravel driveway pit. The pit was located on kind of a sketchy street, but was located a short walking distance to the main strip of bars, so it was a popular living spot for sophomores at my college. After a debauchery-filled year living there, my roommates and I all decided to move somewhere else after the year was over. Like I said, it was mostly a sophomore year hotbed. I was the last to move out during the summer of '07, and thus had to spend one more night at the house alone before moving the next day. As a quick note, I notoriously was bad about locking the front door back then. I would only think to lock the door when I was going to bed and sober. Hence, not a lot during sophomore year. I had a designer purse stolen upon drunkenly leaving it on the front porch. I have since learned better. It was about 6 p.m. when my now former roomie and one of my best friends, Pam, called and asked me if she could stay with me at the house even though she'd technically moved out. Parking was, and still is, a bitch in this city, and her parking permit wouldn't go into effect until the next day, so she was worried about it getting towed. I enthusiastically agreed. I didn't have to spend my last night in the house alone, yay! Pam gets to the house around 6 and immediately locks the front door upon arriving, something I obviously had not done at the time and wouldn't have done until going to bed that night. It should be noted that my room was a first-floor bedroom with a door that led directly outside to our side porch, which was immediately accessible to anyone walking by. So we're sitting alone in my room watching TV when we hear it. Someone frantically jiggling the front doorknob trying to get in. Pam and I look at each other in horror, but chalk it up to typical gravel pit shenanigans, a drunk person, etc. The only unnerving part was how insistent the person was. They must have jiggled the handle for 2 or 3 minutes. It finally stops. Pam and I look at each other in relief and proceed to finish watching TV, but then we hear the person stomping over to the side porch, aka the side of the porch that leads directly into my bedroom. Homeboy then proceeds to bang on the door outside my bedroom before spending another minute trying to jiggle the locked doorknob and force himself in. After several terrifying moments of this, we peek out the window to see a disheveled man with his hands in his pocket, trying with all his might to get in. As I'm frozen with fear, especially because it was an old house and his increased force could have easily broken through the wooden door, Pam just yells, "No!" The banging stops for a bit, and we think he's gone for good, until he proceeds to cross the porch again, and again tried to bang down the locked door. As Pam was calling 911, I have since realized my immediate response to danger is to freeze, thank God for Pam. He then returns to the side door to my room and proceeds to aggressively try to force his way into my bedroom. The police show up a short time later and the man is gone. All we had was a vague description of him from when we snuck a peek from the blinds. Police found the guy was nowhere to be found, but the creepiest part is what they did find. There were chicken bones littered all over the porch and outside the porch entryway and door to my bedroom. Plus there were some scattered in the bushes outside of our place. Nothing came out of it though, and the police just told us to call if it happened again and to leave our doors locked. I constantly wonder what would have happened had Pam not been there that night. If she hadn't, my front door would have been unlocked, and Chicken Bone Man would have certainly gotten into my house to do God knows what. I've never been so grateful for Pam's parking issue that led her to stay with me. Not to mention that I was moving out of that horror show the next day. I no longer reside in that city, but still make it a point to lock the door as soon as I walk in, versus when I'm simply going to bed. That said, Chicken Bone Man, who was hell-bent on getting into my house, let's not meet again.
A few years ago, my roommate and I lived on the 3rd floor, on the backside of an apartment building. She was in the process of moving out though, so it was mostly just my dog, George Washington, and I. I knew just about every neighbor from my building, and from what I know, they were all super chill. In order to understand this story, I need to explain the way my apartment is set up. In order to get to the door to enter our apartment, you will pass by my window, which was a very long window in my bedroom. I had never had any issues until about 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. I heard footsteps on the walkway outside my window and saw a shadow pass it. I'm usually a groggy person when I first wake up, but ever since it's just been me, I became more aware of my surroundings, so it jolted me awake. I had a nightstick under my bed, so I grab it and debate about what I'm going to do for about 30 seconds. I opened my bedroom door quietly, and I started to notice the front door handle jiggle ever so slightly. Clearly at this point I could either shit my pants, get attacked, or scare the person off. But I chose to scare the person off. I turned on the light outside and kicked the outside door as loud as I could and screamed a string of words that would make a sailor blush. Then I heard footsteps turn and quickly walked the other way. I called my stepdad, who thankfully lived close by. He came by to check up on me and wanted me to stay with them, but I said I would be fine, and off he went. The next morning, I got up ready for church, not really thinking about the night before. I returned home shortly after and was texting on my phone as I reached to get my keys and put them into the lock on my front door. I couldn't find the keyhole though, so I looked up and I noticed my entire lock had been bashed in. It hadn't really set in what happened yet, so I opened my door and looked in. A lot of stuff was gone. Television, computer, jewelry. Luckily they left my dog there, and unharmed. The irony is, I got him to be my best friend, and a guard dog. He fulfills one of those roles. I'll let you figure out which. My brain finally caught up to my surroundings, so I grabbed George and ran outside to call the police. They come out, guns drawn, as they cleared my apartment. It felt so unreal to talk to forensics in your own residence. They never found out who did it, and in the end, it worked out okay. A lot of the jewelry they stole was from an ex that I had intentions of pawning anyway, and the renter's insurance covered that, so I got some sweet new technology upgrades. However, I'm still very unsettled internally about that night and day, particularly about the night. I replay it often and wonder what would have happened if I had not woken up, or if the person hadn't been so easily turned away. It's also very unsettling to know that they were watching me, waiting for me to leave for church so they could break in. Ever since that day, I keep my head on a swivel and pay extremely close attention to my surroundings, particularly when I get home. So to the thieving assholes who scared me and stole my stuff, let's not meet.
This happened last November at my student house at university. The house was shared with 3 other people, 2 male, 2 female, and was a pretty standard semi-detached in a nice enough area. It was about 1 a.m. Everyone was in the house. Myself and the 2 other male housemates were in the living room, which faces onto the street, playing on the PS3, and the other female housemate was upstairs in her room. We were having a good time, laughing and chatting, when suddenly we heard a disturbance that seemed to be coming from the house next door, one that we're attached to. Since that house was also occupied by students, all boys, we just thought they were being rowdy or having a bit of an argument. My housemate Toby peeked out of our front window to see if he could see what was going on next door. He then suddenly drew his head back, saying that someone stood on the pavement had seen him looking. We didn't think anything of it and carried on playing our game, when suddenly we heard a huge crash behind us. We turned to see someone slamming their foot against our window and screaming at us. We all jumped to our feet, and I heard the other housemate come running down the stairs to see what was going on. A second later, there were huge slamming sounds against our front door. Clearly someone was trying to break through it, and a man's voice shouting, "Open the door! Open the fucking door!" By this time, I must admit, I was absolutely crapping myself. The noises at the front door stopped, and we heard the guy heading around the side of the house. My blood ran cold. The back door was unlocked. The back door led into the kitchen. The kitchen had 2 doors to it, one leading to the hallways and the living room, the other to the spare room. The living room and the spare room were also connected by a door, so there were 2 exits from each room. We all ran into the spare room, which had French doors that led out to the back garden. That was where most of the panic happened. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know where the intruder was, whether he was in the house or in the back garden. Toby opened the French doors and crept into the garden to have a look. I followed. My other housemate, Lucy, opened the door that was connected to the kitchen and saw the intruder, then slammed the door closed. The intruder now knew where we were. My other housemate, Mike, then held the door closed and put his weight against it. Lucy ran into the living room and disappeared. The intruder began kicking the door that Mike was holding shut until he kicked it so hard Mike was flung from the door. Us 3 remaining housemates then ran into the garden and did some real parkour shit, jumping over the fence into our neighbour's garden. No, this was not the student neighbours, it was the old man that we'd never met. We ran over to his patio. Luckily Mike was smart enough to pick his phone up in the panic and he called the police. I was gently knocking on the patio door and asking for help from the neighbour, hoping that he was downstairs and could hear. Whether he heard or not, he never came. Mike hung up his phone and said the police were on their way. There was a noise at the fence. We all ducked down as low as possible. There was nothing to hide behind, and the intruder rolled over the fence. It was dark in the garden, but we could see him quite plainly. If he looked towards the house, he would have seen us straight away. Luckily for us, that night, there was a party in the house that was diagonally across from the garden we were hiding in, and I think the intruder thought that we headed that way, so he carried on and jumped over the fence, going towards the party. We crouched, frozen for a few minutes. The adrenaline had made my arms and legs completely jelly. We were unsure whether to head back to the house. For all we knew, there could have still been other intruders there who came with the first guy. We had to go back though. Lucy was still in the house. We had to make sure she was okay. Toby went over the fence first, and I tried to follow, but my legs were too much like jelly. I couldn't climb over. After a few minutes, Mike was able to help me get over, and we went back into the house. There were no other intruders in the house, and the police arrived fairly quickly. We eventually found Lucy hiding in her bedroom wardrobe. There was blood on the living room window where the intruder had cut himself breaking through the first window layer. There was blood on the front door, the back door, smeared on the wall in the kitchen, and there were dents on the door leading to the spare room. Because the intruder had followed us over the fence, we were able to give a fairly accurate description of him, and said that he might be in the party around the corner. The police went there and asked if anyone suspicious was at the party. Apparently they had all pointed at a man and said he'd rolled over the fence. Bingo. The lads that lived next door came round to see if we were okay, and said the same thing had happened to them, except their back door was locked, so we hadn't been able to get in. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. On reflection though, since there was only one guy, we would have most likely been able to overpower him. We hadn't known at the time how many there were, so we didn't want it to come to a confrontation. It turned out he was high on coke, so that would have made any confrontation very dangerous, especially if he had any hidden weapons. The man was arrested and charged. He was made to pay for any damages to our house and the student's house next door. Getting to sleep became very difficult after this. Any slight noise was someone trying to get in my head. Eventually, it passed, and I began to feel more safe. During the Easter break, however, we were broken into again. Nobody was in the house this time. The strange thing about this break-in was that none of the valuable stuff was broken. There was a projector, 2 PS3s, and a Wii in the living room. There were computers in every bedroom, and other electronics in Mike's room. None of this was taken. Only a spare mobile, clothes, and some jewellery were taken from Lucy, which made it look more like of an attack on her than anything else. Both of these break-ins happening within one academic year has made me feel really vulnerable inside houses now, whether my parents' home or my students' home.
Last July I was home alone, and my family was in Riverside visiting my aunt. I live in a high crime rate neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was 4 a.m, and I had just got back from a friend's birthday party. So I decided to watch some television in hopes that it would make me a little sleepy. Halfway through watching Hellboy, I hear the side door to the kitchen open. At first, I thought my family had just decided to come home instead of staying at my aunt's. I hear someone walk through the kitchen, the dining room, and the footsteps stop as they reach the beginning of the living room. I was laying down on the couch, furthest from the entrance of the living room, and could not tell who it was. I tried sitting up to see who it was, but I didn't get a glimpse. Thought my little brother was the one that walked in the living room. And so I get up to see what's taken my family so long to get inside the house. I hear footsteps, quickly leaving back out the side door. And I was shocked to realize that the family car was not in the driveway. I get extremely nervous and decide to call my dad to see what's going on. My heart sank when I found out the family was still in Riverside. I turned the outside light on, and I checked how it was possible for someone to get in. The door is spotless, and I couldn't find any signs that someone forced open the door. I checked my pockets to see if I had dropped the house key, but it was still in my jacket. I checked the whole house and made sure all the doors and windows were properly closed. I didn't think to call the police, because as long as nothing was missing, I was fine. Even if I did call the police, they probably would not have caught the crazy guy, because it's not common to find the junkies, gangsters, and common thief hanging around my neighborhood. The next day my family shows up, and I tell them what happened. My parents were shocked at first, but quickly got over it. Sometimes I still wonder how that person opened the door to my house, and why none of the house keys were missing, and the whole house was sealed up. The worst part though has to be that the person walked into my living room, and I did not realize someone had broken in.
This is the first time I'm posting on this subreddit. I am a long-time lurker, since 3 or 4 years. Thinking of this incident creeps me out to this day. So this happened in September of 2015, and I finally decided to post my story after confirming some details with my roommate, who used to stay with me in a PG, paying guest accommodation. We used to stay in a 3-bedroom apartment in a building on the 3rd floor. Me and my roommate shared one of the rooms, and there were other girls staying in the rest of the rooms. It had only been 15 days since we had moved in. We were not very happy staying there, because there were routine water problems. The food was bad, etc. We wanted to move out really bad. So my roommate's parents were going to come pick us up the next day. The night before, which was a Friday, we had some other girls over in our room. We were just having some fun, listening to music, chatting. We were making the most of it since we wouldn't be meeting them anytime soon after we moved out. It was around 2 a.m. when everyone decided it's time to sleep. We all said our goodbyes. The other girls went back to their rooms. My roommate was already asleep. As I wanted to pee and have some water, I go out of the room. It took me some 15 minutes to come back. Everything seemed normal. As I was about to switch off the lights and lay down, I get a call from one of the girls in the room adjacent to ours. I pick it up and she says to come to her room quickly and quietly as possible, not waking my roommate up. I was immediately spooked, but I refused to think anything wrong might have happened. I took my time to go out, and she met me right outside my door. She looked worried. The first thing she asked me was, "Is the door in your room leading to the balcony locked?" I remember I hadn't bothered to secure the latch on it that night because the weather was quite humid. The door was closed, but just not bolted like it would usually be on other days. So I replied no. She tells me to that immediately and quietly. I managed to do it. I ask her what's up because I was really scared by then. She tells me that just about 5 minutes ago, she heard whispering from the balcony. Her room has access to the same balcony. At first she thought it was one of us, but when the whispering wouldn't stop, she went to check from her window. She couldn't see anything in the dark except the clothesline was shaking in a way as if someone just pulled on it. She found it weird and decided to switch off the lights in her room and try looking out again. This time she saw a shadow running past her window and towards ours. It looked like it was a man. At this point, she was sure it was an intruder and quickly called me to warn me. After hearing this, I was so glad whoever that guy was didn't try and enter our room, because I would have been scared and wouldn't have known what to do. I wake up my roommate, tell her not to scream or make any noise. I tell her what just happened, then I look out our window into the balcony, but I couldn't see anyone there. We figured the intruder escaped to the roof terrace because that's the only safe exit, as our balcony was quite high up, on the 3rd floor, i.e. ground +2, and so jumping on the ground wouldn't have been possible. We both decided to sleep in another room, leaving the lights, our stuff, everything in our room as it is. The other room had 3 girls there already, but they didn't mind letting us share their beds. The 6 of us in total huddled together on 2 beds. The other girls slept just fine, but my roommate and I couldn't get a wink of sleep. We were thinking about what could have happened if the guy had tried anything before we were warned. We would have been completely defenseless. Not even a bat, knife, nothing. We didn't sleep till 6 a.m., right after my roommate spoke to her mom narrating this entire incident. Her mom was really ticked. At around 10 a.m., when our parents came to pick us up, we had our things packed. We left, but not before our moms gave the landlady an earful. Looking back, the intruder must have been some guy who knew the building well, and also the fact that our balcony was accessible from the terrace. Also, the fact the clothesline was shaking when we looked outside was maybe because the guy pulled on it while trying to hoist himself up onto the terrace. We don't know why he decided to come there at that time of the night. Whatever it may be, creepy 2 a.m. intruder, please, let's not meet ever.
A few years ago, I was living alone in a little house, which had a heavy back door that would swell up some after it got rained on. It got really tough to open and would make a lot of noise. Late one night, I passed out on the sofa in the living room on the opposite side of the house, but I woke up to something which I now assume was a back door being opened. I'm an idiot, by the way. I never used to lock the back door. Netflix was blaring away on my laptop as I slowly squinted my eyes open and realized there was a black outline of something standing in my hallway looking down on me. Weren't very large or tall based on how much space it took up in the door frame. Being completely disoriented in my waking state, my mind latched onto the first thought that came to my mind, which was, it must be my girlfriend. I was naked at the time and pulled back my blanket with my legs sprawled and junk hanging out, and called to her in my best deep, sexy voice. "Come here, baby." Upon seeing a naked 6-foot, 200-pound man beckoning them to him with his genitalia, the not my girlfriend person immediately turned on their heel, revealing a large backpack, and booked it out the back door. By the time I stumbled up to the door, all I could hear was them taking off into the darkness full sprint. I could only guess that they didn't come there with the bold intention of being the little spoon.
This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. Both our mom and grandmother were busy, so they could not stay home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it was not a big deal. The only thing we could not do was go outside or open the door if someone knocked. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into gaming, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game, but I had turned off the sound. So I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell. She replied, no, she hadn't. She said it was probably just a show she was watching. I brushed it off and went back to playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit, his hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass doors behind me. I turn around to be face to face with this strange man I had never seen before. I had no idea how long he had been watching me. He waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I called my sister's name, who had not noticed the man yet. She grabbed the house phone quickly, calling out grandmother. Now, we had seen salespeople before. None of them looked like this guy. He was wearing a full-on black suit that did not fit him. If not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full-on suit and 99 degrees, he was also carrying a briefcase. All the salespeople I had seen only ever had a clipboard or maybe a couple of flyers, but this man had a briefcase. The next flag that came with this guy, he walked around our house to come to the back door, which during his little trip he would have seen there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating no one was home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reached down and grabbed the doorknob. He started to jiggle it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looks at me, smiling, gestured at me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 70-pound lab mix, making her go batshit crazy. No way she was going to let this guy get to us, if he did get in. My sister tells me our grandmother is on her way.
and she wanted us to hide in the back of the house in her room until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room with me. We shut the door. She tells me after she lied to this guy about calling the cops, she said that he started laughing, like she just told the funniest joke he had ever heard. A little while later, we hear the door open and my grandmother calling us. We come out to meet her. She tells us she did not see a man anywhere in sight. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird if he was a salesperson, he would have left a note saying, "Sorry, we missed you." She ended up taking the rest of the day off to stay with us. Also, so she could watch to see if the man would come back around. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still don't want to know what was in his briefcase.
Just for reference, I live in North Carolina, on a somewhat rural road. There aren't many neighbors, as you would have in a regular city, but we have a few that aren't far. 2 mornings ago, my dad called for my mom to shut the back screen door. It had been banging against the house for the last hour or so before anyone figured out what it was from. My mom headed out to our back deck. Our house is 6 feet off the ground, from the glass doors we always use, and saw not only the screen door to the laundry room hitting our gate's at the top of the steps, but we never used the laundry room door, for the 2 simple facts that it's unneeded and the doors heavily stick. The screen door sticks to the point that you have to use almost all of your strength to yank it open. So we use the glass doors for means of going out onto the back deck, which is rare unto itself. My mom had recently put something on the back deck a week prior, and knew for a fact the gate at the top of the steps was shut, as was the laundry room door. That already is strange in and of itself. Why would the gate be unlocked and the screen door open? Later that day, my boyfriend came over to my house after work, and my mom was telling him what she'd discovered. She decided to show my boyfriend, leaving me in the living room with our German Shepherd. When they returned, she said the door looked as if someone had tried to pry it open with a flathead screwdriver. Our German Shepherd had recently developed seizures. Not to mention he doesn't like our 2 cats and has a horrible habit of eating things off the floor. So we began gating the living room, where my mom sleeps, from the rest of the house to keep an eye on our dog when we're not down at the other end of the house. A day prior to all of this, my boyfriend had dropped by the house while my dad and I were working. Took her some groceries, as Dad and I wouldn't be home until later that night. From the gate in the living room, you can see our glass back doors. Next to the gate is our counter with some bar stools. My mom was preparing something and my boyfriend was sitting at the counter. Out of nowhere, our dog started going nuts, trying to scramble over the gate. My mom and boyfriend looked at the glass, saw nothing. My boyfriend, after a moment, even went to the door. My mom thought there might have been an animal on the back deck, but he saw nothing. They assumed it was an animal that escaped too quickly for them to see. The day of the discovery, we'd had an extremely windy day. which was why no one noticed the door and the gate open until the next day. No tiny animal could have opened the gate and stuck the screen door in that little of time. Not to mention, we know for a fact there were no screwdriver marks before then. The worst part? My boyfriend's Jeep was in the driveway. Whoever came to the back door had to know someone was there, and that our German Shepherd had become sick, so he was being kept off of the rest of the house for his own safety. Plus, they would have had to have seen my family through the glass windows. Whoever you are that came and tried to break in, I hope you stay the hell away.